We're learning Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, Peirush HaMeir. Chalois Toida. Breads that were made for the Toida, which are matzah. Rikiki nozia, which is brought for at the end of the term of Nazarah of the nozia. He should also eat la'atzmoi and yoytze b'hen. So we're learning in the Peirush Chalois Toida. These are breads that one brings with the korban Toida. You have to bring it as is found in Ma'aseh Karbonis, Periktes Halacha Yud Zayin. What is the bread that comes with the Toida? You take 20 isorim soiles, and from 10 of them you make Chometz, and 10 of them are matzah. So as you see that there is Hilchos Toida that are matzah. Rikiki nozia. In Hilchos Ma'aseh Karbonis it says nozia that brought Karbon Oisov. Besides the aisle that he brings, he has to bring also Rikiki nozia. And what is this made of? Which is these breads which is brought with the aisle. He takes 6 isorim and 2/3 of an isorim, and he makes from them 20 chalois, equal ones, and all of them are matzah. They're called rikikim. And he says it makes 10 rikikim with shemen, as it's explained there. Now, these matzahs, the question is, can he use them for the matzah, to be yoytze matzah, if the person who made them, let's see how they made them and when they made them. The person who had the korban made them for his korban, and yoytze b'hen. You can't fulfill your obligation. Shenema, it says in Shemais 12:17, you have to watch the matzah. Matzah mishtameres le'inyan matzah. It has to be matzah that's set aside and watched only for matzah. Bilvat, only for that purpose. Aval zu, what's brought for Rikiki nozia, even though it's matzah, and it can't be chometz. Mishtameres le'inyan hazevach. You're watching it because you need it for the korban. V'im also on l'mkoyer b'shuk, and if you made them to be sold in the shuk, that means a baker who baked the matzah in order to sell them to someone who needs them for Chalois Toida or Rikiki nozia. It could be used for either one. If when he made them, he had in mind that if they will not be used for the korbanos, they will be matzah for the Pesach night. Thus, when he made it, he washed it also for matzah. Therefore, he can't fulfill his obligation because somebody who's thinking of selling it to the marketplace, his thoughts is shem leimkeru. If you won't sell it, he himself can eat it. So they were watched for the purpose of matzah. The Magen Mishnah cites the Mishnah Psochim 35a. The Chalois Toida, the bread of the Toida, and the Rikiki of the nozia. If you did it for himself, you're not yoytze. To sell in the marketplace, you are. The Gemara in 38b says that when he made it for himself, then he needed it for his korban. Obviously, he's a nozir, or he obligated himself to a Toida. Then it's not eligible. But if he made it to sell to others, his thought was if he doesn't sell it, he will eat them on the night of Pesach. Thus, he made it, he washed l'shem matzah. Me'elas chinuch, in mitzvah yud, oish yudalet. He has a question. If you can be yoytze with matzah, that was watched l'shem toida and also l'shem matzah. Now, the Agoyin Mechel Zulban in Sefer Leviam writes extensively with this regard. The Hilchos Chinuch says that the Rambam changed the lotion to the Gemara, that it says matzah mishtameres le'inyan matzah bilvad, and he added the word bilvad. Moisiv, and he added that Ramli didn't write l'shem zevach and le'inyan zevach regarding a korban. And the Gemara is specifically for zevach. So it seems in the Gemara that if it would be done for two purposes, for Toda and for Matzah, it's kosher. For Loshen Rambam, it seems you can't do it if it's done for both purposes. The Tshuvas Noda B'Yehuda explains the Gemara as follows. This is to exclude that which is not Mishtameres L'Shem Matzah, Elo, but l'shem zevach, for the purpose of the offering, that because he watched it also l'shem zevach, can't be mishtamer l'shem matzah. That he learned that you need to have only specifically l'shem matzah. But and therefore, if it's also l'shem zevach, he's not yoytze. But Rashi is medayik. The Hilchos Chametz points out that only according to Rav Yosef was the opinion that you need shiur of matzah of mitzvah. He's not yoytze when he watched it also for the offering. But according to Rava, that the halacha is according to him. If he watched it for matzah and for zevach, it's kosher, and you don't need only the shem matzah. Now, the Goyen Rabbi Rebbe and Birger Shmuel explains that there are things that need to be done l'shmo. For example, a get for his wife has to be done specifically for that, has to be written specifically for that woman who is married to that man. Also, karbonos and ksiva sefer Torah has to be done l'shem mitzvah sefer Torah. That's true. That he does it lishmo. That's how it be. That's part of the process of making it work. It becomes a get. The korban becomes a korban. Sefer Torah becomes a sefer Torah. But there's some intent that isn't because of doing it. And watching matzah, which is learned from the posuk ushmata v'sa matzos in Shmos 12:17, it just says din kavono. The concept of intent as by every mitzvah, that you have to do something. Whenever you do any mitzvah, you have to have an intent. But the Torah said, Ushmartem, that by matzah, besides making the matzah, you have to watch it, the shem matzah. But it's not part of the making of the matzah, which is just like tefillin, that through his intent, the shem mitzvah, it happens to become tefillin, because by matzah there's no obligation of making it. It's an obligation of watching it. But Chaim Brisker says that shimur l'shem matzah, there is two dinim. If you watched it for matzah, the actual watching, it shouldn't become chometz. That's the main purpose of watching it. It should be matzah. Secondly, that it should be considered l'shem matzah's mitzvah. So you can divide it up. L'shem matzah, not chometz, mitzvah, and for the mitzvah. That I'm adding to the pshat here. Maybe Rayim Psochim, he brings a proof from Psochim 35a. I might think you're with Chalos Teru and Kikinoz, Talmud Loima, so it says you have to watch the matzah. Has to be l'shem matzah. And these were not made l'shem matzah, but rather l'shem zevach. Thus we see that even though he made it ma'aseh shimur, he watched it, regarding, and that should make sure that it's matzah, it's not chometz. Still, since it's for another mitzvah, it's not watched for the mitzvah of matzah, because there's a din in the matzah itself that somehow it should take effect on the matzah, the name of the shem matzah. And anything that's made for anything else is not considered the shem matzah's mitzvah. When do you bake these matzahs? Hagos Maimonides and Rabbeinu Menoach say that we're talking about here that he made the Chalos Teru Kikim Nozir on the 13th day of Nisan, because on the 14th you can't bring a korban tamid, Rabbanan, because Minatori even, because you're Mayat, you don't have a day and a night to eat it, because part of the Torah is, as we mentioned before, Chometz, and you can't leave the Chometz. Korban Torah is only eaten for a day and a night, and when he brings the Erev Pesach, the Chometz comes with it. It's also Ba'achila after Chatzos, which is the last end of the time of eating chometz. It must be that he prepared the lachmi toida and the kikinoza to sell them in the marketplace. So for those who are bringing their korban toida on the 13th. Therefore, Rabbeinu Menoach and Hagos Maimonides is saying that matzah, that was made before the time of Bir Chometz, it's kosher l'matzos mitzvah. You see, you don't have to make it after the time of Chatzos, because otherwise, what's the question in the Gemara, whether you can use it? They bring a Rae from the Yerushalmi, and Matzah Yishono. When it comes to old matzah, what is that? It's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in the Mishnah. And by Suki Yishono, Beis Hillel permitted, even if he didn't do it for the purpose of the Chag. So to Matzah Yishono, Beis Hillel would permit it, even though he didn't make it right before Pesach. So we learn from Tosefta that if the 14th happened to be on Shabbos, so you burn everything, even Truma, before Shabbos. Even though the time of forbiddenness would only be Shabbos, but you can't burn it on Shabbos, and you bake the matzah on Erev Shabbos, even though it comes out to be on the 13th. So you see, you can bake matzah before the time of Isser. And so we find Sefer Mitzvahs. That's the halacha. Ilu Rebbe Eliezer Mimitz says, this is not a proof from the Tosefta, that maybe only in Truma they permit to be baked on Erev Shabbos, so it shouldn't become Chometz, and it'll become Lidei Psul. In other words, if you bake Truma, you're not allowed to cause it to be destroyed. So they tell you bake it on Erev Shabbos, and you won't have a problem of if it becomes Chometz, you can eat it on Shabbos. If it doesn't become Chometz, you can eat it as matzah. The Rebbe says the mini kosher is not to bake matzah's mitzvah when you have Chometz, and if you did so, you didn't lose out. Agos Maimonides adds that Rashi writes that you shouldn't bake matzah's mitzvah before Chatzos, just like the Korban Pesach is not slaughtered before Chatzos. The Gemara is a hekesh of matzah Pesach, and even with the Eved, if you did it before Chatzos, you're not yotze with that matzah. The Rekeach adds, it's not correct to bake matzahs of Yontiv Sheni on Erev Yontiv Rishon. Why? Because Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shat, you should do it at the time that it's supposed to be, and the second day is when it's supposed to be, not the first day. And furthermore, because the minig was, if the 14th fell on Shabbos, you can't bake on the 14th, they baked it on Moti Shabbos, the first Yontiv. Therefore, in Chutz La'aretz, you have 2 days, you have to bake the matzah on the second night, just on the second night of Yontiv. Because if it will be baked on the first night, therefore he's baking from one day to the other, and you're not allowed to do that. Rabbeinu Menoach also cites that there are those who are stringent, who make a hidur, make the mitzvah more elegant, to bake it only on the 14th after you burn the chometz, seichel Pesach, that was slaughtered bein ha'abayim, and further, as we find in the Gemara, you should do so. That it's good to do so. However, there's nothing wrong with matzah that was baked by itself beforehand, and it has nothing to do with the Korban Pesach, as we find in Perek Vov here in Halacha Aleph. And he adds that in the Zman of Beis Hamikdash, when it was standing, they baked matzahs before the 6th hour on the 14th of Nisan. Now, how can we be machmir more so what they did at that time? Now, when Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, the Korban Pesach itself, even though the Korban that they brought on Shabbos, they couldn't roast it on Shabbos. They could only roast it Motzi Shabbos. And therefore, there are those who feel that if we're commemorating the matzah in place of Pesach, when Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, you don't bake matzahs Erev Shabbos, but rather Motzei Shabbos at the time when you would be roasting the Korban Pesach. But Rabbeinu Menoach himself points out that you can't say that this is an impediment to to having matzah, and if you have matzah, other matzahs, it's just as good. Halacha l'maisa, the Shulchan Aruch paskins. The minig is not to mix matzah's mitzvah on Erev Pesach until after 6 hours. which is the time of bringing the Korban Pesach. And on the 14th, that happened to be on Shabbos, you mix on Erev Shabbos after 6 hours. So the Mishnah Berurah points out, Noyagim, it's only a minute. He further points out the reason the minhag is because Hilchos Matzah is made similar to Korban Pesach. And just like Pesach was slaughtered only after the 6th hour on Yudal B'Nissen, so too the Hilchos Matzah's mitzvah is after the 6th hour. But the poskim point out there's no reason to be worried about this, because most of the hekesh is referring to eating the matzah on the night of the first night. You should eat it before Chatzos, like Pesach, which is eaten till Chatzos. But regarding baking the matzahs, it doesn't say the hekesh. Therefore, if a person baked the matzahs before the 6th hour, and even a month or two before Pesach, and he did l'shem matzah, it's kosher. Furthermore, he adds, Yichuz Loretz, all what you need on the second night, you should bake on Erev Pesach, not Motzi Yom Tov or Rishon. And he cites that the Choik Yaakov and the Bach are of the opinion that those who bake on the 14th, they have to mix dough after 6.5 hours, because that's when they slaughtered the Korban Pesach actually. But the Machon Nesher and the Rebbe are of the opinion that's enough after 6 hours, because when at Torah you can slaughter a Pesach after 6 hours. You just have to wait before you can offer it until after the Korban Talmud Shel Shachar, Shel Ben Abayim. And he points out further that most of Beis Yisrael aren't capable with this regard to make it Erev Pesach, only individuals. Today there's a lot of individuals. And he found maybe the Yesha, the reason to prove this minhag, because there were those opinions that even on Erev Pesach, Chometz is also b'mashu. And it's very hard to be careful that there shouldn't be a drop of dough left around that becomes Chometz. And furthermore, the Maimon writes that today people are careful, lenient, because they're pressured for time, except for a few that are careful to bake after 6 hours the matzahs, which they're going to use for the first 2 nights in Chutz La'aretz or in Eretz Yisrael, the one night. Chassam Sofer was noyeg, and Erev Pesach was on Shabbos to bake matzahs and Motzei Shabbos and Leil Yom Tov. And we find that the reason is based on Rabbeinu Manoach, because that's the time when even the Korban Pesach was brought on Shabbos, you would only roast it on Motzei Shabbos.